So in 2001, it was very clear to us that a studio-based program was something perhaps not necessary, but a theoretical program. And so even the curriculum that we develop has constantly changed. I have two PhD students who are working on precisely that, NFTs and the politics of digital art, as well as video. So these are two of my current PhD students. Art history was really taught by visiting galleries, acting out paintings, me reading out excerpts from books, etc. And for me, it was a transformative experience because to learn to teach, I had to learn myself.
So coming to the topics that you're talking about and labor. So in what do you think is one of the pressing needs of the art market? One of the things that that you actually have been quite outspoken about is the Me Too movement. So what is the situation today about it? Because there has been a lot of upheaval on that, and why is it necessary to talk about it?
So when the Me Too movement erupted, we had the Heard Scene and website when a lot of women posted their really difficult situation, circumstances that they'd been through in the workplace context. The art world is not organized, right? It comprises of many galleries, it comprises of many young artists. There are artist collectives, there are individual artists who employ younger people to work for them. They are in a very uneven situation of power and subjugation, right? And we know for a fact, I mean, all women know this, that there have been series of exploitative incidents in the past, and I'm sure they continue even today. So when one is aware of these, so it was just really important first and foremost to raise awareness about this and talk about this very openly, and also take necessary legal steps if needed. So, for example, when a star artist decided to take some of the complainants to court for defamation, this was the absurdist thing to do. Instead of just simply acknowledging bad behavior, that all of us can self-introspect, all of us can reflect on how we have behaved in the past and maybe rectify our behavior.
Why this happens, and this happens quite a lot, is this arrogance or it is a complete confidence in the patriarchal society and nothing can happen to them? What actually, and this happens a lot, where the victim after complaining again gets that backlash and then finally ends that thing, struggle, or ends that thing for herself. So what is it that
no, of course, this is also society. So think of how we are socialized into this kind of unequal understanding of male-female relationships. The woman has always been seen as the model and the muse of the artist. That's the art school discourse.
Yes.
Right? So art history is taught to you as if women were supposed to be these kind of passive models, and the male artist was supposed to kind of be inspired or treat her like some kind of a muse. There's a fascinating and really funny essay by Patricia Oberoi and Hussein's fascination for Madhuri Dixit, for example. Right. And I'm not really, I mean, I understand, what Hussein comes from, but the fact is that this is a feminist response, right, to thing. And so we have never really questioned the way art history was taught. And we have not created mechanisms for redressal within the art world. Because you have to have internal complaint committees, but galleries are not big enough to create their own internal complaint committees. More than that, you actually need gender sensitization. You need more open and transparent conversations around this issue. And this is something that we have done. We've held many conversations around this issue of sexual harassment and exploitation in the art world. And we need many more, because it's not something that's ended. It's not even something that people want to acknowledge. I've heard important art world luminaries say, oh, boys will be boys. I said, really? Why are we giving them this kind of leeway? I want accountability. All the younger people today want accountability. They have not been socialized into that kind of a world.
Right. But this is what's happening in all industry. And then art world has the negative, I would say, whatever it's very unstructured. And as you said correctly, the outfits are small. People work with small teams. So that minimum scale is not there to implement these things. So how does one look at even, if I were to do it with my small team of 2 people, I just don't know what to do. I mean, so how does one come together in this industry? And there's a lot of
I think
things
one
to.
of the things is to actually articulate a policy, because these are government mandated policies. Circulate them to the people who you work with so that you know that there are certain boundary lines that they should respect.
Right.
And these policies are outlined, and so every single person that you work with professionally, the persons have to be informed that this is how
The guideline is.
this is not just the guideline, it's the law. And in fact it's a law that actually was the result of JNU having a gender sensitization committee long before anybody else had implemented it.
Oh, really?
Right, we had already agitated and got this way back even before I joined JNU. The GS cash, as it was called, was something that had been formulated much earlier, and that's also the reason why it was such a safe campus for women. Right? We've had 50% women for the longest time. Only university perhaps that had 50% women. So this is something that you really, as galleries, have to do. You have to create those policies. You have to inform every single person who works with you about the policy. And there has to be a broader kind of a consensus on how the art world functions. You cannot say that there's so much money riding on this artist, and I don't want to take a chance with this artist, spoiling that person's reputation because my market will go down.
And
I'm
which
sorry,
happens.
that's not how it works.
And which
is exactly what happens.
Yeah, right. That's true. I would like to discuss now, Shukla, some of your research papers. So one of them that I found very fascinating was the Bombay
School.
Bombay School and
the photography.
Photograph Pentimenti, right? And it was quite a revelation, because when we have studied some of these artists like Ravi Verma, and we knew the transfer from canvas to the oleograph and all that, but the fact that the references were directly from photographs, some of the things are not probably widely that known. So that was a very interesting paper that I came across. The other one that I wanted to discuss, and it was very extremely intriguing, the engagement that you mentioned in, I think it's called Making of Exhibitions, 50s to 60s, Al-Qazi, and you had compared and contrasted the Marathi literature, what was going on there, and about each of their understanding about modernism. So Al-Qazi is known to be one of the very prominent patron in art. So you've also worked in this patronage of art and the history of that. So give us an access of what has been so far, and what is, in your opinion, a good model going forward if we have to broaden the art market. So sorry, two questions in the same. One is history, one is going forward.
Yeah. So there is this very interesting study, many studies that have been done about how the cheapest of material created artistic autonomy. Because it's fabric, paint, and brush, and oil.
Right.
That liberated the artist. Because you no longer had to depend on one specific patron. This happened in the Italian Renaissance context, right? And in some sense, that is also what happens here, because the fact that the exhibition form comes into being, the fact that you're now able to produce paintings on your own terms and not necessarily for somebody else, liberates you from a patronage structure, right? Yes. So you can, as John Clark, the Australian art historian, has pointed out, that the work can be transacted and sold within a gallery context without a direct relationship with the patron. The patron doesn't even know you, but sees the quality of the work and buys it, right? So on the other hand, you have, this relationship between photography and painting, which is something that's interested me for a long time. Also because photography is seen as a modern medium in the Maharashtra context and is treated with suspicion in Bengal. So there are any number of writings by Nandalal Bose, etc., that speak very, disparagingly about photography, but not so in Maharashtra, because it is actually embraced by the likes of Baburao Painter, etc., who have not really studied within the institutional space. Within the institution photography, the JJ School of Art, photography does not actually take root when it's first introduced, because it's seen with suspicion.
You mentioned the whole class dismantled or something happened later, right?
Yeah. But artists rely on photography a lot. So Durandar, all of them are actually taking photographs and then making paintings from photographs. And in fact, there's a very interesting book, a handwritten book on modern art, which was written in the 1930s by somebody called Rajat Deshmukh. And the modern period in that book begins with photography. Right? So you're embracing the new kinds of mediums of expression. And that's what means fascinating. Now, regarding the 1950s art scene, we know that this is a period of institution building, and as art historians such as Iftikhar Dadi have pointed out, that for a modernist spirit to come to the fore, you first need institutions to rebel against. What is modernism? It's questioning
Questioning
institutional.
the existing norms, yeah.
But there were no institutions except the colonial institutions. So
Right.
the 1950s is a period of institution building. And among them is the Jahangir Art Gallery.
Right.
And a lot of the early exhibitions in the Jahangir Art Gallery, among them are exhibitions that Al-Qazi ji mounts called This is Modern Art, are actually drawing upon what's happening in Europe as exemplars of modernism, right? But there's also a space of scandal. So someone like an Akbar Padamsi, when he exhibits his two paintings called The Lovers, it's a policeman decides to do a complaint and he is taken to court. But the judgment is very interesting because he says when you describe a painting as lovers, it's not a religious thing, it's how else would you describe
it?
Describe it. These are two nude figures.
Okay.
Right? And so in some sense it sets a kind of a template for artists first and foremost to create a kind of a scandal.
Yeah, I
And
was going to
also-
ask that.
yeah.
You just mentioned that some time back that they used to create these controversies. So
Absolutely.
As
They
a
used to-
part of promoting. Okay, that's interesting.
And the journal where these controversies would be carried quite often was Marg.
Okay.
Right? So they carry the whole judgment of Akbar Padamsi's
Okay.
court case.
So those are the things that are there in this your edited
Yeah.
that you've edited. Okay.
Yeah. Also, they're setting the template for what art is, right? So even for example, there is this famous sculpture competition that is in the 1950s. And it is a sculpture competition, for the unknown political prisoner. So even the topic is interesting. Think of what kind of official art we get today.
Right.
And here you have a competition in which artists are asked to make works to celebrate the figure of the unknown political prisoner, right? And Pradosh Das Gupta, when his work is rejected,
Okay.
writes a long letter to Herbert Reed, who's the leading art critic of that time, saying that I don't agree with your category of sculpture.
Okay.
Right? So the artist who has won this competition has not produced something that's called. So to the articles of journals like Marg, you're debating the category of what constitutes modern sculpture. So, so this magazine becomes extremely important. And in fact, my recent reader that I put together looks at this trajectory of this journal, which was founded in 1946, Mulraj Anand, and very interestingly, these amazing editors from Sri Lanka, Anil De Silva, for instance, she's involved with setting up this journal. And
So it tracks the writings on modernism for the last 75 years, and it's
Correct.
called Modernism
Reader.
Reader. Okay. Okay.
Right? It's a reader. It's a compilation of articles that appeared, and they were articles by some of the leading scholars of the time worldwide. So we're not talking about scholars writing from just here. There are writings from many important art critics from different parts of the world who are
Of
contributing
Indian
to
art.
this
Or everything around.
on modernism, and not just modernism, because it is a journal that dealt with dance, it's a journal that dealt with architecture. It also has a kind of a conceptual arc. It changes with the editors changing. So the 75 years are not uniform because the editors have changed, right? So the initial years are marked by this very important discussions around modernism, but also on what is heritage, what is new forms of architecture. The setting up of the National Institute of Design, for instance, is an important event. There are also volumes that are devoted to specific mediums. So an entire volume, for example, on graphic art, one on photography. So literally how this discourse unfolds in Indian art history has been mapped by this journal, right? It was the most significant journal.
Yes,
that
that's wonderful. So there are so many different perspectives and definitions. I would like to ask you a couple of definitions for my knowledge. One is, what is modernism to you?
So modernism is really an attitude, and it isn't necessarily something that arises from the 19th century. It is, I think, an attitude that has been in place for centuries. The capacity to question, debate, critique. That for me is an understanding of modernism, whether it is through your practice, whether it is through theorizing about what art is, right?
The modernism attitude can be contemporaneous also. Today also we can be modernistic. Is that?
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
And however, art historically, it's something that's been periodized.
Yeah, right.
It's something that we consider to have started somewhere in the mid-19th century, and it's something that went on till about the 1970s.
70s, yeah.
So art historically, it's periodized now. But think of this, that the first museum of modern art is established in the 1920s.
Right.
So by that time, it's already a museumized form.
Right.
Right? So, I mean, what is modern, if not a canonical modern that's housed in a museum?
Right.
If that's what modernism is, then it's not about an attitude. Right? And so, when you talk about the isms, we also have to understand that these isms are largely terms of convenience, art historical convenience.
So that it's easy for us to group and study them.
Yeah.
Is that?
That's how art histories were written at a certain, you look at Arneson's art history. The isms were something that unfolded in the West. So these are terms, however, these terms can have relevance and importance in today's times. Expressionism, for instance, there's a wonderful scholar called Rahul Dev, who has looked at the extended life of expressionism in India and how, especially within marginalized communities, it becomes a form of visual articulation. Right? It's something that's embraced as a kind of an emotional form of expressing marginalization. Right? So it has had a long life. Right. So terms, come and go. It's not as if they're fixed in time. They can have multiple different lives, and they can get articulated in different contexts.
Right. So also, in the current scenario, there are so many eclectic, diverse movements, styles, genres that are happening. How would you, is that ism still relevant? Is canonization of something make sense today? Or do you think we will see a trend retrospectively after 50 years that, okay, yes, there was some trend? What does it feel to you? That is there anything about, the whole, that the Western way of looking at things, abstract expressionism, impressionism, and all the movements coming to modernism. So it's right now, seems all over the place. Individualism seems to be the more important thing. What is, in your opinion, are there anything specific trend that you see that is making history today?
Yeah, so what exactly is a canon? A canon is something that the institutions of art recognize as having significance. Now, the institutions of art can be the institution of art history, it can be the institution of the museum,
museums,
it can
galleries,
be
and all.
Art criticism as well, right? Now, what do we value as a society, right? And art will continue to be produced. It'll take on different kinds of forms. I think one of the most significant and important moments of defining the contemporary really was the inauguration of Bharat Bhavan. And there are many interesting, research that's been done in recent times about what is actually done in that space is that modern artists who have come out of institutional spaces have the same platform as artists who don't come from the same perceptual system.
Yeah.
But how do you actually look at it? There's a lot that needs to be theorized and looked at. That if you look at the photographs, and these photographs are all available online now in the Asia Art Archive website, that you will see that urban-rural divide is still there. So you have the modernist artists carrying their canvases, etc., and you have these laborers, who have come from tribal families. They've been brought in to build this massive edifice, and they're cleaning the floors, they are painting the walls, they're lifting the sculptures. What Swaminathan does do is that he also gives them that space for creative expression, the paints, this thing that's provided. That a lot of these artists who eventually have important careers for themselves come out of this institutional space. So as we look at someone like a Jangat Singh Sham, we have to understand that he's actually from the modernist institutional space of Bharat Bhavan. He's not part of a tradition of painting that he brings with him.
He makes his own.
He makes his own. He's familiar with mythological subject matter, and he's looking at a lot of paintings. He's producing something.
Would you say his is a canon? It is a canon now. That is
absolutely.
Of course, the story is unfortunate what happened to him, but that is some kind of canon.
Absolutely.
Okay. But that's one part of it. But can you kind of encompass the whole thing that's going on in India? Because right now, it's no longer India. I think it is not. It's global. And are there trends and movements that you see as a critic, researcher, historian that will take shape in a more solid form later? Do you see some things? What are the big trends that you are seeing?
I think a lot of young artists are extremely thinking artists. The commodity form of art, which has somehow become something around which value has been created through hagiographic writing, etc. A lot of this is seen as a kind of a collectible that has to kind of advance in monetary value.
Hmm.
But we're also seeing a shift in art patronage. Think of the number of art residencies that are now being supported, right? And a lot of these artists are taking up issues such as gender disparity, caste-based issues, environmental issues. A lot of this is actually happening outside of the space of the museum or the gallery. I'm not saying
the
that
traditional spaces, not happening in traditional space as much as happening in other.
but I'm not saying that the museum and this thing does not have its relevance. It too has its own relevance, right? But it really depends on what we think of as having significance in society. As people who support it, as people who write about it, and see it as having significant value for the future. And I'm talking in terms of its social significance.
Social significance, yeah. And you see that will ultimately, although as we discussed earlier, immediately is not feeling, the art market is not feeling the effect, but that will ultimately have that effect. That's great.
Absolutely.
So back to a very simple question, what is art to you? Because you've been looking at art from different prisms as an artist, as an aesthetic, as an historian, researcher, as an institution builder. So what is art to you?
So, I don't think you can disassociate aesthetics from practice. These are two things that come in tandem with each other. And of course, there is a certain kind of a technical kind of a vanguard where you kind of use it, explore new kinds of mediums that are coming into existence. But at the same time, what does it really do to our social worlds? How do we actually recognize this as something significant, right? Unless and until it has some kind of a connect to, people, I'm finding it deeply problematic when people look at abstraction as something that is not connected to the real politics of our times. Let's look at where it comes from, right? If you just look at Russian avant-garde,
correct, yes.
constructivism and suprematism, it is the result of saying that I don't want to produce art that is in the service of aristocracy and religion.
Right.
It's a political move. That I'm going to purge any literal content, I'm going to purge it of any kind of valorization of these two institutions, religion and aristocracy.
Even the abstractionism of the female artist of the American, the 1950s onwards, the wives and the other friends of the abstract expressionists, there was also a reactionary thing because of that hyper-masculine environment, and they were reacting to that and making smaller works of abstract. So
absolutely. I mean, you look at someone
it's
like
a political
Nasreen
statement.
Mohammadi.
Yeah, correct.
So Nasreen Mohammadi's work, against the backdrop of where figuration has become the form of expression in Baroda, she persists. And she's the only woman out there as a faculty member who's persisting with this practice. Right? She's, in some sense, making a political statement.
Isn't that way all art a political statement, and all art are not political
all
statements?
art that is significant.
Significant, yeah, right. So one final question, Shukla, what do you think about this platform of Chaibrary?
I cannot think of a better way of commemorating the memory of a very important and significant artist, Jawaharlal Ji. He was somebody we learned a lot from, and he was somebody who really gave space to younger people. I had my first joint exhibition with him, right, with a group of artists from this thing. So here was somebody who actually believed in kind of encouraging a lot of young people and was a very steady and an important presence in the studio all the time.
That's great. That's great to know that. And Shukla, thank you so much. I personally learned a lot, and it was an absolute pleasure to talk to you about such diverse topics.
Thank you for having me, and all the best for the future.
Thank you so much. I hope you have enjoyed this episode of Chaibrary. Do subscribe to our channel if you haven't yet. We continue to look forward for your love and support. Don't forget to press the bell icon for further updates. Until we meet again, this is Lubna Sen. Take care.